Welcome to the second The Cricketer and the Voice podcast. Let me first of all make some introductions. Joining me today, the great and the good from the Cricketer magazine, Sam Morshead, the digital editor for the Cricketer. Welcome, Sam.
Rodney.
We've also got a man I've met in the past, Huw Turbervill, the managing editor of the Cricketer. Huw, welcome.
Hello.
And we've also got Machel Hewitt from the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Obviously a very happy man, like my good self. Welcome, Machel.
How you doing? How you doing, everyone? Pleasure to be here.
Very happy. Gents, we've got to really start off. I think it'd be odd not to really thank, first of all, the tremendous effort by the players, the ECB, and all concerned with that fantastic test match last week. Sam, your view on the effort that was put in, not just for the 5 days, but prior to that, to make sure that the game took place, and what a game it was.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? To think of this country, of all countries, to be hosting international sports at this time is quite amazing. The effort that's gone in across the board from the ECB, from Cricket West Indies to get the players over and the players to come away from the relative safety of the Caribbean and to fly into a COVID hotspot to play team sport for the good of the game was tremendous. And they should definitely be applauded, and hopefully the Cricket West Indies will be rewarded down the line as well by the ECB as they should be. The whole logistics of that match was just extraordinary. When you read on social media or the papers or whatever, what it's taken to get those games on, and the amount of testing that's been required, and the social distancing that's had to be followed, and everyone's had to all buy into it, and they did. And there's not been a single showing case of coronavirus across the entire period building up to it. It's been well followed, well regulated, and at the end of it we got the reward of a really, really good test match, and I think a result that it was the best that the cricket could have hoped for sure. So yeah, what an effort it was by everyone to get that one.
Absolutely right, and none more so than the players for what was a special 5 days, and bearing in mind we lost most of the first day, still to get a test match of that nature was first class. Machel, from your viewpoint, what tribute could you play to the West Indies cricket team, bearing in mind the conditions that the game was played in, bearing in mind that sometimes they have been seen to be a little bit lightweight when they've come over in recent years? What tribute could you pay to the collective effort of Phil Simmons and the entire West Indies team?
You know, there's so many moving parts to consider when you look at why and how the West Indies have been able to pull off the win in the first test match. So I'll quickly just highlight some of them. I think one thing that I don't know if it's been written about a lot yet, and it certainly, I hope, will be by the end of the tour. Unfortunately, the unfortunate circumstances is the pandemic. That's what's led to the kind of creation of the biosphere. But in a roundabout way, it's actually helped the West Indies. The Test, ODI, T20 calendar is so chocker the rest of the time that it's cleared up a huge pathway for the West Indies to come over to England and have effectively what is a 4-week camp. They would never get this normally. They'd be rushed in, 2 weeks before the start of the tour, play a couple of under-strength county teams, and then get humiliated in the first test. That's generally speaking, that's what's happened in the 21st century. They've had an intensive 4-week camp. Every single player that I've spoken to or the backroom staff have said they have benefited from being able to be in a close bubble and just do intensive work. You wouldn't even get that in the Caribbean before a home series, never mind an away one. So what that has done is, and because England haven't had the benefit of a county season to come into the start of the series, I believe it's levelled the playing field. The West Indies, talent has never been an issue for the West Indies. What is resources. So in many ways, a 4-week camp in English conditions has allowed us to enter a test series on par with England, and we've caught them on the hop, in essence. So credit must obviously go for the players, the staff, Johnny Grave, Jimmy Adams, all the people in the background who put in the work for this tour to go ahead. But I think the players and the backroom staff will look back on this in hindsight and say, I wish the ICC could let us have this amount of time for every series. And that goes for a lot of the weaker nations in cricket. I guarantee you, lots of nations are looking at this going, I wish we could have this build-up time. Pakistan right now are probably benefiting from their build-up time ahead of the tour as well. So,
Mm. And of course, you know, as the West Indies status, from my viewpoint, has gone backwards over the years, they're normally here in May, aren't they? When there's an English winter that's quite chilly, to say the least, and hasn't really been conducive to what they're all about. Huw, what tribute could you pay to the West Indies team for what was a superb effort, apparently against the odds? Because when we did this first podcast a few weeks back, we did suggest that England were the favourites. That was understandable, but they were given a match all the way for those 5 days, weren't they?
The best tribute I could pay is that this attack that the West Indies have is starting to make me feel or look back to the 1980s. It's sort of Fab Four. It's really impressive. I mean, the batting unit is sort of bit inexperienced and lacking a kind of Viv Richards, Richie Rich and Brian Lara, Desmond Hayne, Gordon Greenidge type. But the bowling is quite a fearsome unit now, isn't it? So that's really the best tribute I could pay to them. They're sort of almost, I mean, I know Roston Chase bolts some handy overs and got a couple of handy wickets, but they almost sort of don't need a spinner now. In the old days, they used to have sort of Viv Richards or I think Larry Gomes used to turn his arm over now and again. But yeah, they're a really fearsome unit. So that's the best tribute I can pay to them. But it's really interesting what Machel said there about the way they're bonded and given a proper lead-up time. I mean, I don't know whether the IPL not being on, did that help as well? I suppose that was a bit further back, wasn't it? But yeah, no, really interesting what you said there.
Machel, just going back and picking up on what Huw was saying about that sort of fantastic bowling attack. We did say in our very first sort of preview podcast a few weeks back that the bowling did look serious, and it did come over that way. And Shannon Gabriel, for me, who's sometimes been a little bit ill-disciplined, you never know what you're quite going to get. He took 9 wickets in the match, and for me was dangerous throughout. He now looks, and obviously, you know, one test match win doesn't guarantee, you know, success for the rest of the summer or moving forward. But he now looks like a man that understands that he's a spearhead, he's got pace, and he can put the fear of God into certain batsmen.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the key for Shannon, because Shannon, I wrote about this a while back, Shannon debuted for the West Indies all the way back in 2012. I was there for his debut at Lord's in the 2012 tour. And it has taken, yes, as you say, the best part of 6 to 8 years for him to recognise his own ability. But what Shannon says, when you speak to Shannon about it, he says the difference is fitness. It's not, he's always had the raw ability, but Shannon could give you a great burst at the start, and then his second and third spell, it's downhill. What was significant about Shannon in this test match, and has been in fairness for the last 2 years, is he comes back again and again and again, like any genuine strike bowler should do. And I guess picking up on Hugh's point about the attack as a whole, what's good about the attack is they're all different. They're all different, and they complement them. They complement each other. Jason adds the swing. Kimar has the control. Shannon is the strike bowler. Alzari is the young pretender who's obviously going to take over from Kimar and Shannon in due course. And not that we're talking about England, but I thought England were a bit too samey in comparison to what the West Indies had, where 4 bowlers all bringing something different to proceedings.
Yeah, absolutely right. And of course,
because you had Garner's height, Marshall's skiddiness, Holding's sheer pace, whereas England would go in 84 Lords, they'd have those 4 right arm, medium fast bowlers. So it's kind of history repeating itself, isn't it?
You know what? For me, I mean, it's fantastic to hear about these 4 bowlers, but it's almost scary to talk about the current crop in the same breath as that crop that you were talking about before. It scares me because if we can get anywhere close to the success that fantastic 4 gave us as West Indies supporter, we'll be somewhere close. And of course, Sam, we have got to pay homage, haven't we, to Jason Holder, who has handled himself as a captain and as a leader par excellence, and then goes onto the field and takes 6 wickets at a crucial time for his team, leading by example again.
Yeah, Holder has been a fine captain for West Indies for several years. It's not new that we should be saying that he's an excellent captain. I think that the most important thing that he did for this team in this match was that first innings performance with the ball. beyond his captaincy. He took control of the test by producing more than one spell of very incisive understanding of the conditions that England just simply didn't get by putting in Mark Wood ahead of Stuart Broad. And he got it he from the off, get it on that line and length. Doesn't matter if it's 79 miles an hour, just short of a length and nipping away, bit of overcast conditions. You're going to cause any batsmen problems when they've hardly had a hit over the course of the last 4 months. That was what England should have done. England should have quite obviously have gone Stuart Broad. Yeah. West Indies had Jason Holder. He made the difference at the start of that test match. So way beyond his captaincy, because we all know what he is as a leader. But as a player in that test match, you've got the understanding of the conditions. He applied his skills perfectly. And then that was the platform from which his team could go on to win.
Absolutely. Great leadership and great example. Huw, staying with all-rounders, Ben Stokes, lead for that test match, didn't seem to affect him in terms of his playing ability. 2 40s and 6 wickets in the match. Natural leader, natural captain, or did he give you what you expected in that role?
Just the last point on Holden, he might be 79 miles an hour, but his height is a tremendous asset, isn't it? So that kind of compensates. Yeah, we had an interesting discussion in the office about why on earth Stokes would want the captaincy, and we talked about various things like the ego of the all-rounder, the Botham, the Gregg, the Flintoff, that, you just feel you can do anything. You're indefatigable. You're indestructible. The other thing is, you're the best cricketer, so why should anybody else get the job ahead of you? But going forward, he has got a huge workload. If he's going to really want the job full time, if Root, say in England, lose in Australia and the winter after next, and Stokes emerges as a long-term candidate, he's going to have a huge workload. I mean, look at Flintoff in Australia in 2006-07. It was just too much for him, really. So I don't know whether Stokes is going to be able to manage it on a long-term basis. You kind of got the feeling in this match that he kind of perhaps realised that they'd left Broad out. That was a huge mistake. Everybody was feeling a bit depressed, and he had to literally haul England through that match, didn't he? With that first innings bowling spell, I think, 4 wickets. Yeah, he realised it was on his shoulders, and yeah, he stepped up immensely, and what a character he is. So I think tactically, I didn't see any real reason to criticise him. I just think really they got it wrong, didn't they, with the selection and the batting, where they were 50 runs light on each innings, really. They should have made 50 runs more.
I mean, Machel, in terms of Stuart Broad missing out, as a West Indies fan, supporter, that was a plus straight away for you, wasn't it?
Oh, I was ecstatic. But do you know what? Jumping off the back of Hugh's last point, it wasn't just Broad missing. What I found quite perplexing was everybody knows what West Indies' weakness is. We can't put consistent batting together across 2 innings in a test match, never mind across a series. And you have your first test of a series and you don't put the West Indies in. I just found that quite baffling
in those conditions.
In those conditions, and I look. So I'm not blaming Stokes' captaincy, but I just look back at that decision and think, you saw the conditions, you know what our trump card is. We can actually bowl, and I just look back and go, what was that about? Was it about we're going to dominate from the off? I really don't understand what that was about, and it handed the advantage to us. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, it was all very gung-ho, wasn't it? It was let's do quicks together. It was intoxicating, the desire to have the 2 quicks together, and very, very much gung-ho approach by Stokes, wasn't it? I mean, the other thing you were saying about you saying the West Indies' weakness is not putting 2 performances together across 2 innings. But I mean, the weakness of their batsmen and the other overseas batsmen, whether it be India or Australia, is facing lateral movement. I don't know whether Mark Wood, I mean, he just seemed to bowl so short all the time. I don't know, maybe he did that, I think it was at Johannesburg when he got 9 wickets, but it was just banging it in halfway down. And I mean, West Indies can cope with that, but what they can't probably cope with is the swinging ball, isn't it?
Well, there's a very good point to that Mark Wood is not a bowler for English conditions. Joe Root has a better test average in England than Mark Wood has with the ball. There is no real reason to choose him if we're going to go horses for courses, as we've suggested in the last couple of years Ed Smith as the selector in having a go with Adil Rashid or bringing Joss Butler in, or perseverance with Joe Denley. It just seems a little bit misguided. Pick a team to win that game. It's the only international cricket match that's taking place. Everyone's watching it. I think Michael Holding described it as probably the most watched Test match of all time, when it may well have been when we get some figures together. So pick a team to win the most watched Test match of all time. Don't be trying to excuse looking ahead to the Ashes. That's an argument I've never really understood. But it did seem like that's what England were trying. And yeah,
I don't believe Brooks was looking to the Ashes. I just think he wanted Wood in and not Broad.
Yeah, simple as that, really. Take away all the science. Listen, Sam touched there on Michael Holden. Machel, I've got to ask you this question. It was one of the most powerful bits of broadcasting, sportscasting that I think we've ever seen. What was your take on Michael Holding's outpouring in returns to the Black Lives Matter campaign and everything around it from your viewpoint?
I'm not certain if I fully come to a judgment necessarily on what I feel about it and its impact, but what I will say is this: Michael Holden doesn't mince his words. He's always been and will be a straight talking Jamaican. And so when he said what he said, I wasn't shocked in the slightest. That in many ways, that's how I'd expect many men of Jamaican extract to speak about things. But what was good about the way Holden did it is it was uncompromising, it was blunt, it was obvious. Well, not when I say obvious, I mean you couldn't argue against the points he was making. And I think it helped as well that it was from a West Indian perspective, to kind of just give a bit of a different light on it. And it made people think. I mean, I haven't looked since, but I think by the following day, like 2 million views on clips on Twitter and stuff. So even if somebody wanted to be churlish and say, well, it's just clickbait, it was what it was. Well, 2 million people watched it. So that means at least 2 million people had food for thought.
Yeah.
Now, not all of those 2 million needed to have the food for thought, but even if do you know what I always say is, even if it was only one person out of that 2 million, that's one person more than was listening before. So I think it's set, because I was always mindful for the tour. How are the players going to be able to set the tone for this? As Sam's saying, potentially it was the most watched Test match of all time, but actually Holding's words set the tone.
Absolutely.
And it took the pressure off Jason having to do something. It took the pressure off Ben Stokes having to do something. Everybody saw what Holden said. And Ebony, in fairness, let's not leave Ebony out of this. And I thought it was perfect in the sense of it came before the test. Everyone was talking about it, and it acted as a form of education.
Absolutely, and well said. So we move on to the second Test match at Old Trafford, Manchester on Thursday. Sam, what can we expect? More of the same? Maybe not in your case in terms of the result, but what do you expect to happen?
Well, it's set up nicely, isn't it? I mean, this is exactly what the series needs, exactly what cricket needs. England need a wake-up. I think we can expect Jimmy Anderson to be a little bit more effective than he was at the Ageas. I think we can expect Stuart Broad and Anderson to be in tandem for the next one. Whether or not they'll then rest Anderson for the third test, I'm not sure. I mean, he's going to have to be rested at some point over the course of July and August. I think we'll get another tight, engaging, entertaining contest, providing the Manchester weather allows that to happen. I think that what we've seen is that these two teams, elected as they currently are actually quite equal. All in the conditions and in the circumstances that Michelle was talking about earlier. And that makes really good cricket. So I think I'm not going to predict a result now because I don't know which England's going to turn up.
Yeah.
I think that remarkably, we might be even more certain about which West Indies is going to turn up than which England's going to turn up in the second test. Because you would think that West Indies side has got some self-belief, some momentum. They know their core strengths and they produce on their core strengths, but they've also got someone like Jermaine Blackwood coming in and hitting a 95 in a winning chase in England. No touring number 6 or lower had hit a 50 in a successful chase in England in tests prior to that, not on Sunday. That's got to give him so much confidence. and finally take away the tag that many people have of him of just being a guy who wants to go in and bash it and lose control. There's lots of real positives from the West Indies. They'll be so confident, won't they? And they've just got to keep that under control. And Simmons and Holden have to keep it under control. That doesn't become overconfident, and that they believe that they're now invincible because they've produced one incredible performance. Because England certainly won't go into the Test match not wanting to have that extra edge, knowing they need to fight back straight away. So the toss will be really fascinating, and to see which way the winning team wants to go in conditions that will probably suit bowling, because they generally do in Manchester. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
What do you think the English batsmen need to do differently, Sam, for the second test? Obviously, we don't know the personnel just yet, but what do you think they need to do different? Because there was little bits of positivity along the way in terms of Crawley, etc., etc. What needs to move on a little bit for England to maybe win this one?
They've got Joe Root back, and that will make a quite sizable difference. You know, we've started complaining in recent years about the fact that he's made 70 and not 150, but you know, a 70 in either innings would have gone quite a long way in that particular Test match at Southampton. So that will be a big difference just in itself. I thought both Sibley and Burns showed why they're going to be paired up there for a while. So it's just that number 3 position really. That needs some sorting, whether it be Denley or Crawley. I guess we'll find out pretty soon. In fact, by the time we actually stick this out on air, it might have been decided already. But that's the bit of fragility, the real fragility which England have. I think they were outplayed by West Indies in Southampton. I don't think that you need to sort of pick up too much of what England did wrong, bar selection, because there were players that probably aren't suited for not just that game, but for Test cricket. In Joe Denley, I'm obviously thinking of in that particular instance. But yeah, I think a little bit more application maybe, but just they came up against a good West Indies attack on a good several days, and they came off second best, and they'll have to come off better in Manchester if they want to win it.
Huw, I read a lot of criticism about Joe Denley after the first test. Are you part of that gang that sort of smashed him all over the place for his performances, or do you stick with him?
No, I'm not. I wouldn't stick with him, but I'm not a critic of him. I think he's done reasonably well. Age 32, 33, 34 to come in. I would never have expected him to play 15 Test matches for England. He's shorn up the number 3 position to an extent. He's ensured that Joe Root doesn't go in too early. He's soaked up a lot of balls. He's tried hard, but ultimately an average of 29 after 15 tests doesn't cut the mustard. My benchmark would be someone like Mark Butcher, who averaged 35 and produced some hundreds. So I've moved Joe Denley on. I'm putting my head in the sand about reports that they're going to keep him ahead of Zach Crawley. I just absolutely gobsmacked by. You can't even accuse Ed Smith of Kent bias because they both play for Kent. That Sam was saying about somebody getting a 70. I mean, Zach Crawley did get 70 off, but I think one of the openers maybe should go on and get a decent score. They're both, the 30s, 40s, 50s. That's what it lacked, somebody to go on and get 100. Root obviously coming back will help. He's the proven performer. I mean, I've written a column about it, but I can't remember an England side in my memory that hasn't had a great in it in the top 4. Very kindly, Andrew Sampson has pointed to one, I think, 28 years ago, where England had Robin Smith and Mike Atherton, but they were at the start of their careers, I think. So, yes, it was the most inexperienced top 4 I can recall. In terms of the bowling, I'd bring Wokes in for Anderson to rotate it, and Broad in for Wood. And I expect there'll be a bit more spin in Old Trafford, as is traditional.
Yeah, absolutely right. And Machel, obviously, the $1 million question I've got to ask you is a traditionally inconsistent West Indies team capable of putting together back-to-back performances, which would mean they would retain the Wisden Trophy?
Well, we're going to retain it. I've already decided that.
You decided.
But remember, because now we're 1 up, we don't have to. We can draw this now and retain the Wisden Trophy. So I've decided we're going to retain it. I'm not sure how, but I did predict that England would win 2-1. So it wouldn't. I am kind of expecting England to come back hard now, particularly obviously in the second test. I think I'm not so bothered about who or what choices England necessarily make for the second test. I think my concern, as always, will be the batting. I've seen enough of West Indies batting over the last 20 odd years to know that we're brittle. But if the pitch takes spin, the West Indies have a selection dilemma themselves. Rakeem Cornwall is waiting in the wings. Old Trafford is known to take spin. Yes. And I would feel it would be... My gut says the West Indies are going to go in with the same 11 and try and win this series in the second test. But I feel like there's no room for sentiment. And just because we won with that 11 doesn't mean you play with that 11. In the same way how England didn't call the pitch right and pick Wood and Archer, you look at what Old Trafford is saying, and if it takes spin, Cornwall comes in and someone has to be dropped. If they don't go in with Cornwall and it takes spin and we're relying on Roston Chase, we could have a problem. But then I'm surprised that Huw and Sam have both not mentioned Jack Leach as an option to replace Dom Best, because of all of our batsmen are pretty much right-handed. So England have a problem in that sense as well. Dom Best can bat. Jack Leach, well, we know about what he did in the Ashes, but do you know what I mean? So both teams actually have some selection dilemmas to think about ahead, and I don't think it's as cut and dry as how they will both line up. But no matter what happens, we'll retain the Ashes. And the thing is, trophy and the Ashes.
That's how good we are.
The Manchester weather might give you a draw, but I mean, Best bowled really well in the first innings and was under-bowled in the second. So I'm not sure. I mean, you make the point about, right-handers and so on, but I think Best was underused, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
It's the difference in average, though, isn't it? I mean, Leach averages around about 25 to bowling against the right-handers, and Best averages 35, and that's the difference there. But Best has got so much control, probably more than any other spinner has for England for a while. So, do you want the control, or do you want the incision?
They might rotate it, yeah.
Yeah. Listen, I get the impression, just listening to you guys, that it's going to be another special test match coming up at Old Trafford. Yeah. So it might be the second, or even the best watched test match, bearing in mind that people will now know, because we're still sort of like enduring lockdown to some degree, aren't we? Well, people will now know that England and the West Indies are pretty fairly matched. So anything could happen, which is fantastic. So something else that's happening that excites me this week is a special edition, Huw, of The Cricketer, out this week, as I understand it, which focuses on West Indies cricket. Tell us what we can expect when we purchase that, and how's that been working on that for you and Sam?
And so, and Simon Hughes, the analyst, the editor of the mag. So he did a round table with you and Avi Sikandar and Ebony Rainford Brent and Dean Headley, didn't he, about how Black Britons seemingly sort of loved the game in the 80s and 90s and have fallen out of love with it and have turned to other sports like football and basketball. So the four of you, I think, had a round table discussion about how to re-engage Black Britons into our beloved game. So that was an interesting piece. We had Mike Brearley talk about the diverse background, the diverse dressing room that he presided over as captain of Middlesex. We've got Dean Wilson, the cricket correspondent at the Daily Mirror, laying out a blueprint for a similar theme there about how we can get some black guys playing and women playing cricket again in this country. We've got Roland Butcher talking about becoming the first black man to play for England. So it's a great package we've got together in this August issue that's out this week. And Brian Lara.
Brian Lara. What's Brian Lara?
Named by John Westerby as his favourite cricketer. And we've got Derek Pringle talking about Sir Everton Week. So what a package.
What a package. And that's out, on Thursday?
Yeah, come out on Thursday, Thursday or Friday.
So I'm looking forward to that. I've got to tell you guys, I'm actually going to Barbados on Saturday. And one of my greatest friends when I started my career is Roland Butcher. So we've had sort of email dialogue. We'll be meeting up. And I will probably do a Zoom interview with him, which, I can share with you guys as well, because he's got a lot of things to say. The first black man to play for England. So in terms of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, Machel, tell us a little bit more about it. And what can we expect to hear or see in regards to that podcast?
So it's interesting that Huw mentioned the round table that you were part of, because that kind of theme is why we created the podcast in the first place. I am in my 30s, and the co-host Santoki Nagilendran is in his 30s as well. And we just felt that we were part of a dying tradition I was born in Jamaica, Santoki's Guyanese, but black men who have grown up in Britain, and the oral tradition of the love for West Indies cricket, to me certainly, and to Santoki, we felt like it was dying out. We couldn't identify a generation underneath us that was coming up. And as a result, both of us like writing. I probably prefer talking more than Santoki does, but we just thought that there was a niche to be told from a Black British perspective about West Indies cricket, and also because the West Indies in this country are largely seen through the lens of how brilliant we were in the 80s and the 90s, because obviously what's happened since the year 2000 has, largely speaking, been dreadful, give or take some T20 World Cups here and there, and our franchise players in T20 tournaments, test-wise, dreadful. But that doesn't mean the talent had gone away. The talent was still there, and we just felt like, let's create a podcast to essentially bring an up-to-date account of what's going on in West Indies cricket. So this squad of 15 plus the reserves have travelled for this tour. Jason Holden, #1 all-rounder in the world. Craig Brathwaite has been an opening batsman for a long time now. Some of the up-and-comers, he's not here on the tour. Shimon Hetmeyer will be one of the most exciting batsmen in world cricket within the next 3 to 4 years when he finally realises his potential. Alzari Joseph, 22 years old, part of a Wisden Trophy attack. Probably even shouldn't be there yet, but is already there. We've got the players. The players never went away. So it was about creating a kind of media platform to highlight what's going on in West Indies cricket. We joke about West Indies cricket that there's always a drama. There's always a board dispute. There's always players falling out with the board. So we just felt like, let's bring it up to date. Let's try and tell people the stories. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at. That's kind of where we're at with it. And it's going well so far.
Good. Well, me and you will need to touch base and see how we can help you spread the word on that. I'm going to leave the last word with Sam. Sam, Michelle's talked about West Indies, always a drama, but the talent is still there. What tribute could you pay to the coach, Phil Simmons, who, whichever country he has managed or coached, has found success as far as I'm concerned? And same again last week.
Yeah, I think that Ponda Riley might be starting to eat his words a little bit, or his written word anyway, and trying to get Phil Simmons for going to a family funeral under coronavirus restrictions. Yeah, look, the guy makes things happen at the teams that he runs, doesn't he? And there's no better tribute than the results that he's achieved with both West Indies and with Afghanistan. And yeah, I think he might be set there for quite a long time. And I think that anyone who supports West Indies will want him set there, because he seems to have achieved, not only on the pitch, but an environment off it and working with board, almost harmony. And that doesn't seem to happen very much in West Indies cricket of the 21st century. So, yeah, he's part of some really important glue. Him, Holder, and their relationship with their chief exec and the board, that seems to bode really well. I mean, I think we'd all hate to talk too positively, just in case we put the kiss of death on it there. But yeah, he's a fantastic person to be leading the team. And for cricket's sake and for West Indies cricket's sake, long live his reign.
A great coach and an even nicer man. That's what I say about Phil Simmons, a really nice guy. Listen, guys, it's been a real pleasure. This second edition of The Voice and the Cricketer podcast has been insightful as ever. Sam, many, many thanks. Michelle, the same. And Huw, thanks for joining us. I'm really looking forward to that special edition of the Cricketer. I'm going to try and make sure I get a couple of copies so I can spread that to the family and to Roland Butcher as well. Listen, guys, thanks for your time, and we'll catch up soon.